This occurrence happened many years ago. However, still haunts me to this day thinking about it. I try my best to avoid talking about it. But I feel like everyone should know my story, so that they can protect themselves of anything like this happening. I met my, now ex-boyfriend, let's call him John, in university. It was my first year and he told me that he was in his second year. I was at a freshers' party when I first noticed him checking me out. His eyes wandered from my face to my toes and back up before he decided to come over and talk to me. He seemed friendly and nice and was decent looking. We spoke to each other all night over a couple of drinks, while we got to know each other a bit more. He was studying engineering on the other side of campus and was a bit older, around 25, 26 years old. Anyways, it got late and around 1 a.m., I decided to head home saying my goodbyes to John and my friends. John asked to drop me home, but I know better than to let a stranger drop me home. Sure, we spoke the whole night, but he was still just someone I met. I declined, and I saw that was a little pissed. He kept insisting, saying it's late and that it's dangerous to go home at this time on my own. I told him that I would get an Uber home and wouldn't have to worry. He agreed and went back to the party. I got home that night and thought it was a bit weird of him to keep insisting on taking me home. Maybe he's just really worried, I thought before going to sleep. I woke up later the next day, sometime in the afternoon, and had the worst migraine ever. My sleep kept getting interrupted by vibrations coming from my phone. Ugh, I groaned. Who the hell keeps texting me? I muttered. I checked my phone and saw many messages from a number I didn't recognize. They've been texting since 11 a.m. and it is now 3 p.m. I soon realized who it was. The first message said, "Hey, it's me, John. I got your number from a friend." The second message was, "I know you're awake, answer me, love." And after a few more messages, the last one said, "Are you seriously ignoring me?" I was so confused. I replied saying I just woke up and who was this friend? He avoided the question and changed the subject suddenly and asked me how my day was. My confusion faded as I thought maybe it was one of my girls. I started texting him as normal. In fact, kind of flattered, he went out of his way to get in touch with me. In about 3 to 4 weeks, we had gotten close on text and would see each other every other day. However, he only wanted to see me in the evenings and never during the day, as he had a full schedule and was only free after 7 p.m. We didn't go on any dates or anything romantic, but we would chill and just get lost in conversation. I really enjoyed talking to him. He seemed so sweet and genuine. So, I didn't mind because I also was busy during the day too. Fast forward a month in, me and my friends wanted to go on holiday on our break for a few days. We planned everything and booked our tickets for the following month. Me and John were not official during this time. However, we were getting to know only each other. We saw each other that night and I told him how I would be going away, and before I could even finish my sentence, his expression turned dark and full of rage. He looked me dead in my eyes and in a panic tone said, "What? You never told me this. You can't leave just like that. You're not going anywhere without me." These words took me by surprise. His loud voice and body language had me frightened. His hands were in a fist, and we was waving them all over the place. His huge and large figure, towering over me, blocking my exit. I thought he was going to hurt me. I wanted to get away as soon as possible. He was screaming his head off about how I'm actually going with another guy and not my friends and all this BS. I said, "I can't do this right now," and shoved past him running home. My heart was racing. I've never seen him that angry before. He started spam calling me and texting me, apologizing. But I didn't want to speak to him anymore. It had really turned me off, and I sent one message a few hours later saying, "Sorry, I'm done," and blocked his number. I had to block no callers as he was spam calling on there too. It had been a few days since the breakup. After receiving numerous text messages from different numbers, only one stood out from the rest. "You just made a huge mistake." I felt threatened. I realized he was a crazy psychopath. I screenshotted the message hoping to show to the university's security control, which I did not get a chance to. Later, that day as I was walking home, it must have been around 8 p.m., I felt a shadow follow me. A tall man in a black hoodie right behind me, following my every move, step, and direction. I knew I was being followed. I continued walking for what seemed like hours until I ran inside an open coffee shop. The figure wore a mask and looked at me for a split second, but turning around and walking away. I recognized those violent eyes, John's eyes. I decided to stay home for about a week, just packing and ordering things online for the holiday. I was too terrified to do anything. I couldn't call the police just yet as there was a lack of evidence, and I wanted to go with strong evidence to get him arrested. He didn't know where I lived, so I thought. As I was asleep, I jolted up to the sound of a window breaking. I called 911, and when it was safe, I went to see what just happened. A brick was lying beneath me with a note. "Watch what happens next." I was so terrified. Once the police arrived, I told them everything and showed them what I could. They said they would keep a lookout and start investigating. I felt unsafe being home after that. I called a friend and stayed around hers for about a few days. However, around the second day since I stayed over, I received a call from the police. They said that John had been arrested. I let out a sigh of relief until the officer continued. Apparently, John was never a student at the university, and that his real age was 32 years old. He had never actually stepped foot in the university ever and lived about an hour away. This would explain why we would always meet in the evening, where he would be hidden. But this did not scar me as much as it did when I heard what the officer had to say next. They had been patrolling my home for about a day, until they noticed a suspicious smell. When they got closer to my home, they realized it was the smell of petrol scattered all over the outskirts of my house. John was just about to light a match until he was tasered by the police. He had been taken into the station and will now being tried for attempted arson. I instantly fell on my knees and cried hysterically. My friend came and comforted me. I struggled explaining the news I had just heard without whimpering like a baby. My heart shattered and I felt like I was going to be sick. John had tried to kill me in my own home. Whatever happened next was history. It has been 3 years since this incident took place. It still horrifies me till this day. I keep thinking to myself that if I hadn't stayed around my friend's house that night, I wouldn't even be here to tell this story today. I live alone in my one-bedroom apartment back in NYC. My parents and I have always been close. However, we never spoke or mentioned anything about my grandparents. Whenever I brought it up in a conversation, it was always shut down by a quick, "Oh, they don't care about us," or "Stop worrying about them." Until one day I got an unexpected call from my mother. She was crying and visibly upset. I asked what is wrong. She sniffled and said, "My mother is very sick and that I should come to my grandparents' house immediately." She texted me the address and directions to get there. I was so confused. The grandparents that were never meant to be mentioned, I am now visiting them? I have no idea who they are. What would I say or do? These questions quickly filled my head. I decided that I must go in order to pay my respects on behalf of my mother. I took the next available train. The train rattled along the tracks, its rhythmic clatter echoing through the air. I glanced out the window, watching the world outside blur into a dark world of nothing. My destination was a remote village, deep within the woods, a place forgotten by time. The train pulled into the station with a screech of breakers. The platform which I had gotten off on was, covered in the glow of flickering lights, had felt abandoned. There were no other passengers, no station attendants, just an unsettling stillness that hung in the air. My footsteps echoed as I walked into the village, and my service had cut off. The streets twisted and turned, each corner revealing broken-down buildings with windows like empty eyes peering into the darkness. All of a sudden, fog arose from thin air, making it difficult to see ahead. As I walked deeper into the village, I made it to my destination. The house was massive. It was enormous, however, it was very old and covered in dirt. The windows were foggy and blurred, with one of them being completely shattered. The front door was covered in cobwebs, and the wood was peeling off. It had no doorknob, no doorbell. I pushed open the creaking door, its rusted hinges groaning in protest. The house was empty, the air heavy with the scent of old wood. A frail figure emerged from the shadows behind the living room table. An elderly man with sunken eyes greeted me with an unsettling warmth that contradicted the creepy energy around us. "Welcome, son," he said, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Your mother and grandmother are asleep. Your room is on the top left." I hesitated. the unease settling in the pit of my stomach like a stone. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, I hissed, "Let my mother know I am here, as I don't plan on staying too long." And it was true. I didn't plan on staying here for more than I needed to. Everything seemed off, and I had no interest talking to my grandparents. He chuckled and sat down. The hallway leading to my room was dimly lit, the flickering bulbs creating shadows. The air grew colder, and a hushed whisper seemed to follow me, as if the very walls held secrets waiting to be unraveled. Upon entering my room, the door shut behind me aggressively, and the light bulb swayed overhead. The bed was covered with moth-eaten linens, and the musty scent grew more pungent. I shook off the discomfort, telling myself that it's okay, and would be only for a night. As I settled into bed, the clock's ticking became a haunting soundtrack to my dreams. Strange images flashed before my closed eyes, shadowy figures moving around the room, and distant echoes had caused me to wake up in a cold sweat. The clock read 3:33 a.m. Surely I'm just imagining things, right? There is no such thing as haunted houses, so I thought until I entered this village. I got out of bed. I felt hungry as my last meal was about 5 hours ago. I made my way downstairs, the staircase creaking after every step. I was surprised to see Grandfather in the kitchen, sitting down drinking tea, I assumed. The same position he was in before I went to my room. Grandfather? I questioned, his head not moving, his body still. "Yes, my son," he said in a cold tone. All I could see was his black silhouette figure. "Is everything okay?" I replied. No response. I walked closer towards him, even though my gut was telling me to go back upstairs. I paused when I saw him get up, his eyes still on the ground. He never looked up once. He hugged me, his arms wrapped around me. Something was off. I didn't feel that warm feeling as I did upon arrival. His body was freezing, like extremely cold. He was much taller than before, and was very skinny. I could almost feel his bones. Before I could open my mouth, he whispered, "She's not gonna make it," before letting me go and heading upstairs. All while this was happening, I couldn't help but feel guilt and sorrow for my grandfather. Besides my personal feelings, at the end of the day, his wife was very ill, and he had no hope in her making it. I screamed goodnight while he went up the stairs. The stairs, however, did not creak at all, unlike how it did for me. I expected it to be because of my weight, right? I went to get some food. Nothing. Absolutely nothing was in the fridge except the stench of something dead. The smell was so revolting I lost my appetite. I decided to starve tonight and just go to bed. As I walked through the halls on my way to the room, I realized that there were no other rooms. It seemed as if my room was the only room in the entire house. It was dark and dimly lit as it were before. This time I felt more paranoid, as if I were being watched. I did not let my judgment get the best of me. The time, 3:45 a.m., and finally drifted off to sleep. The next morning I woke up. The first thing that came to my mind is, where is my mother and grandparents? I heard muffled voices from beneath me and figured they were all awake and downstairs. I got dressed and made my way downstairs. The hallways were brightly lit, the sun beaming through the shattered window. I didn't feel that same horrifying feeling as I did last night. The stairs creaked once again when I came downstairs. My mother greeted me with a look of confusion. "When did you get here?" she said. I told her I got here last night, and that grandfather had told me you and grandmother were sleeping. My mother looked puzzled and slightly anxious. "What are you talking about?" she stated. "Where is grandmother?" I replied, annoyed and dodging her question. It was too early to be playing Where's Wally, I said to myself. "Oh son, grandmother was pronounced dead this morning at 3:33 am. We tried to save her, but nothing worked and now she's gone," she wailed. I comforted her, wiping her tears away and hugging her. She broke the hug and took a deep breath. At least she can reunite with her husband now. "What? Reunite?" I asked her what she meant. What she told me next turned my stomach inside out. My face became pale, and I was on the urge of puking. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but grandfather died 7 years ago. It was sudden and unexplainable, so we decided it was due to old age. Grandmother has been suffer." Her words became silent after she mentioned grandfather's death. No, this is impossible. I was literally with him last night. I screamed. I stuttered, trying to explain yesterday events. She sighed and hugged me. You saw him too, didn't you? I stopped speaking and came to the cold realization last night I had encountered my deceased grandfather. I know how crazy this sounds, and no one believes me except my mother. Sometimes I even doubt myself if it was all just a hallucination. But his hug, his voice, his body reminds me of his realism. We left and never returned to that ghost town.